So Senator Mason, Representative Plummer, distinguished members of the committee, top of the afternoon to you. My name is Diane Russell and I represent District 120 in the Maine House of Representatives, serving the good people of Mundry Hill in downtown Portland. Today we start a journey toward a broader conversation around marijuana consumption and use. And I could not be more appreciative of my good friend, Portland Representative Ben Shipman, for beginning this journey. For years we've talked about medical marijuana, but today we begin the conversation around how we as a state regulate what adults do on their own time in the privacy of their own homes. LD 750 and 754 would move toward further decriminalization and reduced fines for the possession of marijuana. I believe these two bills are a very good start to the conversation. However, I'm sure nobody will be shocked to hear that I also believe that it's time to fully legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana. As you know, there are opportunity costs with every policy focus, particularly in law enforcement. Every time an officer spends time tracking down recreational marijuana users, there is an officer that is not responding to gang violence. There's an officer who is not responding to domestic violence. These are the issues that are devastating our communities. And I believe this is where our policy focus should be. Within the next couple of weeks, I will be releasing another long-awaited bill to legalize marijuana, and we will have ample opportunity to discuss its merits. But I did want to come today, though, to extend my support for Representative Shipman for getting the conversation started, and for sharing my vision of a state where we can care more about keeping marijuana out of the hands of children than we do about turning law-abiding citizens, otherwise law-abiding citizens, unnecessarily into criminals. So I don't want to take up much of your time. I know there are a lot of folks who have been waiting a very long time to have the opportunity to speak on this issue, and I know they are very excited to share their thoughts and their hopes and their dreams with you. So I will thank you for your time and your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Representative Russell. Any questions? Senator Trzaskowski?
I think I'll just stay consistent, being that we've all sworn to uphold the Constitution and stuff. How do we deal with the federal government trumping us on this subject, in your mind?
You know, no, it's a fair question. I think that there are provisions that allow us to make decisions about what we do in our own state. We have some states' rights that I think that we should feel happy in supporting. And I'll tell you that the last time we had a major prohibition, it was the prohibition of alcohol, and it required a constitutional amendment in order to happen. And that prohibition was started in Portland, Maine. Maybe a lot of people don't know that. And I think that the vast majority of law enforcement professionals and policymakers back then just determined that prohibition of alcohol ended up creating more violence and creating more crime than it actually prevented. And ultimately, we decided at that point, I did not because I was not old enough, my apologies, but I'm not that old. We decided that it was time to reconsider that constitutional amendment, and it was, in fact, repealed. It's the only constitutional amendment that has been repealed. So if you require a constitutional amendment to prohibit alcohol, I think that there are very real questions as to whether or not a constitutional amendment would be required to prohibit other such items that one would consume within their home.
My name is Jonathan Leavitt. I'm from Sumner, Maine. I'm director of the Maine Marijuana Policy Initiative. And to be perfectly clear, we're not here today asking this body to make a change. We're here to say that it's long past time for the legislature to recognize a change that in this state and this country has already happened. Most Mainers, like most people in the United States, have enjoyed marijuana at some point in their lives. And I'd venture to guess that more than a few members of this committee have indulged a few times. Already to most people in this state, the idea that an adult smoking a bowl or two after a long day of work somehow threatens public safety is as foolish as the idea that there's something wrong with an Irishman enjoying a pint or 6 of Guinness on St. Patrick's Day. And it's kind of ironic that we're here talking about this on this day today. The marijuana laws in this country and this state are relics of a racist paranoia about a strange plant being smoked by farm workers and by jazz musicians, seedy, un-American characters like Louis Armstrong and Bing Crosby. These laws were ridiculous when they were first passed, and they're just as ridiculous today. We're talking about a plant. It's a plant that people have used for thousands of years to ease their pain and to help them relax. Some people smoke too much and end up glued to a couch for a few hours. Some people eat too many hot peppers and get indigestion It's not the government's job to control marijuana any more than it's the government's job to control jalapenos. Decriminalizing marijuana recognizes a cultural change that has already taken place, just like decriminalizing taking baths without a physician's permission or dancing on Sundays. The question isn't whether society views people who grow a few marijuana plants or enjoy smoking a joint with a few friends as criminals. The question is whether you want to go down in history as some of the last people to officially call them criminals. It's time for a change.
Senator Mason, Representative Plummer, honorable members of the Legislative Committee on Criminal Justice and Public Safety, my name is Irene Firenze. I live in Bowdenham, and I'm here to speak in support of LD 750 and, as a matter of fact, also for LD 54. I never thought I would be involved in support of any kind of marijuana legislation since I have no personal interest in it. I'm not a medical marijuana user, nor do I use marijuana recreationally. I am, however, a licensed clinical social worker, working with people who suffer from mental illness, and often a combination of mental illness plus physical illness. Some of my patients are medical marijuana patients. Actually, they're my clients. They're medical marijuana patients. I support the illegal use of marijuana as medicine, since the clinical literature gives very strong evidence of its effectiveness for various physical and mental disabilities. The citizens of Maine voted to allow the use and growing of medical marijuana, but as the laws were written, the will of the people was undermined by making the legal use of medical marijuana extremely burdensome for patients and caregivers. Furthermore, in the past several months, there has been a concerted effort, it seems, by law enforcement to discourage the effective implementation of the law by raiding the homes of licensed medical marijuana users and caregivers. In some cases, non-users of marijuana were charged with possession because they lived in the same household as legal medical marijuana users. By decriminalizing the growing and possession of relatively small quantities of marijuana, the risk of arrest of innocent medical marijuana users, their families, or their caregivers, or their caretakers, and I'm talking about wives and children who have to take care of a disabled person, that will be reduced. Their risk will be reduced. Personally, I would favor a revamping of the People's Law to bring it back to its original intent to allow people to grow and use medical marijuana without fear of harassment and persecution.
Hello, my name is Jacob McClure. I'm from Washington, Maine. Good afternoon, Senator Mason, Representative Plummer. I'm not accustomed to public speaking, so forgive me a little bit of floundering here. I'm going to try to make this really brief. I'd like to start by saying that I don't want to see this issue get convoluted by a lot of talk about medical marijuana. We're not really here today to talk about medical marijuana. There's another bill that will be coming up soon enough to address that. And I'd like to keep on point here with the decriminalization of the cultivation of 6 or fewer marijuana plants. As we all know, and as you heard from Representative Chipman, the possession of a small amount of marijuana has been decriminalized for some time in the state of Maine. And as you also know, a large percentage of our citizens report using marijuana recreationally as well as medicinally. When an individual chooses to use marijuana, they are presented with 2 options in which they might procure it. Option number 1 is to grow their own, for which they face for 6 plants up to a $2,000 fine and a year imprisonment. Option number 2 is to purchase it on the black market, which would be a civil offense. From a law enforcement standpoint, this doesn't make sense. Purchasing on the black market encourages drug trafficking. It directly funds Mexican and Canadian drug cartels. Whereas if someone was to cultivate the amount of marijuana that they chose to use personally in their backyard, there would be no transactions, no money would change hands, and no drug dealing organizations would profit from it. Decriminalizing the cultivation of small amounts of marijuana for personal use would deliver a crippling blow to the illegal drug trade, specifically the Mexican and Canadian drug cartels who funnel marijuana into our state and money out. This is dangerous to our communities. Each day, valuable law enforcement resources are being consumed investigating and prosecuting individuals who choose to cultivate or use small amounts of marijuana. And meanwhile, the prescription drug, the crack cocaine, and crystal meth problems here in Maine runs rampant, much to the dismay of my community. we've seen robberies. Yesterday I read in the newspaper of a knife point robbery of prescription drugs at Rite Aid. Last summer it was a machete robbery of Rite Aid. We're talking about an individual robbing a pharmacy with a machete, and as soon as he got hold of the drugs, he dropped the machete and began consuming them directly on the spot. This is the kind of things that people in my community are worried about. These are the ways that we would like to see. Officer Cashman spoke of the limited resources available to law enforcement to deal with these prescription drugs, cocaine and meth. And people in my community would like to see these limited resources focused on those things and see them shifted away from prosecuting harmless citizens who want to use. Mr. Grzowski had asked the question about the Constitution and how do we get over the federal Constitution. I think what we should really be asking ourselves here today is we should be questioning the constitutionality of marijuana prohibition in the first place. The Constitution of this country gives us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Also gives us the right to feed ourselves. And the constitutionality of marijuana prohibition, it's unconstitutional to prohibit what people can or cannot grow as far as raw herbs go in their own homes.